this is our Design Your Career workshop that is an open format. It's the first one we've ever done this way, but it is an Ask Us Anything. So we will be taking your questions tonight, and we are the Pathstream career coaches, which are the people on this call with you this evening. And short and sweet, our agenda for tonight is to answer your questions about your career. So some of these kinds of questions could be things like, how do I answer the interview question? What are your weaknesses? What's the best way to talk to my manager about a promotion? Does it really matter if I don't have a college degree? So these are just some of the types of questions that might be on your mind, but these are the kinds of things we want to answer tonight. So we're going to do a couple of introductions of who's on this call, but while we're doing that, I would love you to start typing any questions that you have about your career and put those into the Q&A. So who is on the call tonight? Myself, my name is Lauren. I'm a career coach at Pathstream, and I do other things at Pathstream, including learning design and curriculum. And I'm joined by Andy, Rachel, Nehemiah, and Melanie. And I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves and share a little bit about their passion and their career. But also, I would love for them to answer the question, what is one piece of career advice that you received early on in your career that's been really helpful? So because Angie's right next to me, I will have her start us off.
Hi everyone, lucky me. So I am also a career coach at Pathstream, and I primarily focus on all things data. But another hat I wear at Pathstream is the director of the data program here. So if you know, I've probably helped some of you with going through the courses. I'm very familiar with a lot of those. I've helped build some of those, actually all of those. So can definitely answer any questions around that. In terms of the question, what was some of the best advice I received earlier on in my career? Sorry about the phone. Short and simple. It was network. Especially when I didn't have any experience myself. I think once I was able to kind of jump into the role that I wanted, or like the industry that I wanted, it was so much easier to get, into the actual roles that I wanted. But before, I wasn't really able to kind of do those cold applications, if you will, but networking helped me so much, helped me bypass all of those kind of connections that I had helped so much. And if you're on the shyer side, which definitely I am, or I was a lot more, some advice that I got alongside networking was create a really great online presence. So that to you may be creating like a strong online portfolio, maybe from all the projects you've worked on, really strong LinkedIn, whatever that may be. If you don't want to like in person type of really expose yourself, online, try to represent yourself. So that is some great advice I've gotten.
Thanks, Angie. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Sparks. I'm calling in tonight from Philadelphia, and I am a career coach and at Pathstream. And then my other hat and another job is I'm a learning and development leader. So a little bit more about me. Ever since I've played rec soccer as a kid, I've always been that person with the most assists. I wasn't the most person scoring goals, but I always had the most assists. And I bring that same approach to my performance support and my day job and in my coaching. So I love setting people up for success, whatever that means to them. And I've worked with a lot of different types of clients in workforce development and performance support in that capacity, whether it's graduates from a boot camp who are looking to transition their career into software development, or government employees in the Philippines with leadership development, to returning citizens re-entering the workforce after some time away. But currently, I work as a learning and performance support manager for a company called Aramark, which is a Fortune 500 company headquartered in Philly. If you've ever been to a ballpark and gotten food, we manage that, we oversee that. And I oversee our global leadership and skill training programs across the world. And in my experience throughout my career, probably Angie, you similar feedback, similar best advice that I've received from my career is get out there. Don't let you be the person who tells yourself no. Because you'll hear no's, right? You'll be like, no, you're not the right fit for this job, or no, you're a better fit for something else. Don't you be the person who tells yourself no too. Get out there, put your name in the hat, but don't you be the limiting factor. Always say yes to yourself and count yourself in, especially as you're making changes or looking for new approaches or maybe a new career track. And part of that counting yourself in and saying yes to yourself is talking to people, networking, having learning meetings where I'd love to learn about the project you're working on at this company. And maybe that leads to an interview, or maybe that's a really strong relationship that you come back to 10 years from now. But get out there, count yourself in, and learn from the connections you make, whether it's a referral or a friend or a piece of insight you can use in an interview later.
Thank you, Rachel. Nehemiah, how about you?
Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. I am Nehemiah. I'm coming out of Brooklyn, New York City. I've lived for the past 7 years. I'm currently a career coach with Pathstream, and I currently work with all of our tracks. So our Salesforce folks, data folks, program management, a little bit of everybody. The best advice I've gotten for my job search is to smile. Smiling during your job search, particularly while you're doing the interviews, one, it helps calm your nerves, and two, it helps you, have a high range of confidence. And so, during your interviews, during the job search, remember to smile often.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Melanie.
Hi there. My name is Melanie Wexler. I am a career coach with Pathstream, and I've been primarily working with the students on their LinkedIn profiles. And in my other hats that I wear, I'm actually a full-time career coach. And so I was actually a recruiter for over 20 years prior to entering coaching. I'm based out of Washington, D.C. And I would say the biggest thing that the biggest piece of advice I got was just to really believe in myself, especially when I came out of school. I had a degree in PR, no clue what I was going to do with that, or had no experience whatsoever. And that was the best piece of advice, was just, be confident in your answers, and be, especially through the interviewing process, and, be your biggest cheerleader and celebrate your small wins. And that's ultimately what landed my first job.
Amazing. Thank you, Melanie. So we've got some really great questions coming into the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen actually, and I'm going to kind of get to some of these questions. So give me 1 second here. So looking at our Q&A, I'm going to kind of go in order, and I might jump around a little bit. But one question has come in about how do you talk about gaps in your resume when you're telling somebody about yourself kind of in an interview? So how do you frame those? How do you make them, look the best possible way? So I'll let anybody kind of take that one.
I think I'll go first. One of the first ways to really show those gaps is, we're all human, we're not, we all go through our own experiences. And so, there can be some transparency when kind of describing kind of what was going through those. You don't have to go into explicit detail about what was going on through those gaps, something just straight to the point about kind of what was going on. And then what some people like to do when talking about their gaps is kind of what they did that wasn't kind of like a official job, but related to something else that's kind of maybe school related or project related, and talk about how they spent their time doing that. And that's not really reflected in an official role, but they're always being a productive member of society during that time, right? So kind of just talking about that, and how just communicating with them human to human is always kind of a great way to kind of demonstrate that gap. And I think it also kind of varies on the on the length of the gap. If it's like 1 to 2 years, I don't think you really have to go into that much detail, but if it's like a lot more, then yeah, you can describe it in a lot more.
To build on what Angie shared, is that's exactly what I would say, of focusing on a gap and speaking honestly to it and what you still did during that time. The piece that I would add to close, if someone is saying, so what did you do during this time? Or I see you had a gap in your resume here. Close with focusing on the future. So saying, during this time, I realized that my passion or my strengths lie in XYZ. And so now returning to the workforce, or when I returned to the workforce and went into this role, I knew I was looking for something where I could do XYZ, which has led me to you, and focus on what you're bringing now based on that growth, self-reflection, and time that you took, whatever it was during that gap.
Great. Thank you both for contributing. And I want to hear from Melanie and Nehemiah on this next question, which is about career changers. So people that have backgrounds in maybe healthcare or something else, and they want to move into something totally different. How do you recommend they talk about this in an interview specifically?
I'll start that. I'll start off with that. And I think one of the biggest things is really make sure prior to even the interview that you've looked at the job description and you start to really hone in on the skills that you have and how they relate to the job that you're interviewing for. And if it is, and sometimes that may be through different types of training, that may be through internships, whatever type of experience that you can relate and be able to showcase that you've experienced it, but maybe just in a different type of environment or a different type of setting. That's really going to be the key, is being able to share that story and how your skills can translate and how they're transferable to that new opportunity.
Absolutely. So that word translate is the word I use very often with my clients, with my students. So an example, I had a student who was a receptionist at a dentistry firm, and now we're looking into customer success roles, right? Because she handled crises, she handled transferring information to the client. She made sure that there was problem solving in relation to the queries of the customers. And so a piece of it is, like Melanie's saying, one, you need to make sure you're identifying the strengths. You're identifying, the things that you bring, that you've been able to do, and the key skills that you've done in the previous position. And then thinking about, where can these skills translate to? Maybe they might not be, in the same topic or same range of topics, but could this skill, be used in a different context? And part of that is reaching out to your coaches as well, and looking at different positions, and thinking about if certain positions that you're doing could be applied. And so another example, I had a digital marketing student and who was a former English instructor, and we realized that being a copywriter would be a perfect for that role, because copywriting involves a little bit of social media management, but also too a very, very keen eye for diction and syntax and all those Englishy things I don't know about. And so being willing to have a high level of flexibility in terms of the job openings out there, but really making sure that you're identifying what are some of the top 3 to 5 strengths and skills that you displayed at your current workplace or the workplace you're transferring from, and then thinking about, okay, if these skills are possible and I was able to do this, maybe are there 2 to 3 that I could really focus on the next position that I'll be looking at.
Nice. Thank you, guys. So this is a different question that I'm seeing in the chat that I think is a really good one. But it's about how to approach your manager about working remotely or working in more of like a hybrid environment. I think a lot of people have become remote over the last few years, but some managers still really want their team to be in person. And so if you know that you work better remotely, like how can you talk to your manager about something like that? And I'm curious if anything's coming to mind for our coaches.
I can take that. And one of the things that I tell my clients even today, because that's something that my clients are facing all the time, is you really need to make sure you have your facts behind you. So show how if you've had the opportunity to work remotely, show how you are productive. So if given those opportunities, be able to back it up with like evidence of like what you've been able to accomplish. And if you are looking for it, be able to, again, back it up for what the expectations are, and that also what they can expect out of you, what hours they can expect you to be online. Because oftentimes the scare factor of working remotely is that managers feel like, oh, you're not going to do anything. So they want to know, give yourself deliverables that you can actually, deliver upon, and be able to hold yourself accountable for that. And, even asking to try it out on a test case basis, and this is what you'll receive. And so if you go into a conversation like that prepared, then they're more likely going to be able to take you seriously and, consider that as an option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that, Melanie. I was just gonna mention, I'm really big on like the trial thing. Like if you can trial it out. And I know this is a little bit different because you're already in the job, but for those that are like going into a new job, this can also be a factor as part of like your negotiation, like part of your benefits. If working from home can be an option, or you want it to be an option, it's not always money that has to be a perk, right? Not always has to be a benefit. Like now this can be one of those things that you factor into your package. So make sure that if that's like a non-negotiable for you, you talk about it early on, because it's a little bit simpler to negotiate earlier on before you get the role than like later on.
Totally. Thank you, guys. So there's a couple questions in the chat about like elevator pitches, which I think people use a lot of different words to describe this. This can be, something that you say to somebody that you just meet in a networking conversation, or it can be something that you really use to answer the question. So, Lauren, tell me about yourself, right? You can also a good time to use your elevator pitch. But this question is going to come up a lot. And so I want to hear from the coaches, what is kind of like the one piece of advice you have for people when they're crafting that answer to that question, tell me about yourself.
I'll start with a basic approach. Write it down. Mm-hmm. Write down your answer, even though it is a conversational question and it sounds like, oh, it's a warm-up, it's an intro. It can make or break an interview. It's probably why you're asking, right? You know it's important. So this is not something to wing or see how it goes when it comes up, or to sound authentic. I want to just roll off the cuff. It is one to write down, and the more you practice it, maybe counterintuitively this sounds, the more authentic it's going to sound, because it sounds like you prepared and that you know yourself and you know what you're bringing to the table.
If you're in our career services, definitely use our little template. It helps make the process a lot. But to piggyback off Rachel, I 1000% agree. Write it down. Like, this is a tough question for a reason. Like, who are we? Like, it's actually a little bit like existential if you start thinking about it, right? But definitely write it down. There's like so many different structures that kind of help answer this question. One of those are those like past, present, future type of templates to kind of write down, okay, what was I doing in the past? Okay, what am I doing now? What do I want to do in the future? To kind of try to narrow down some of like the more relevant information about you, and kind of put it into some sort of structure so that you're not kind of spiraling everywhere when trying to answer that question. But when you write it down, it just makes it so much easier to kind of be able to check off, like, is this really what I wanted to say? Okay, now that it's written down and like I try to verbalize it, does it still sound the same? Like if I was someone else listening to this, would it flow? Would I be wanting to listen to this? So yeah, I would say definitely agree, write it down.
One thing I'll add as well is, feel free to add your personal to your professional story. So, in my tell me about yourself, anytime I'm up for career coach positions, I'll start off with the idea that I'm the oldest of 4 brothers, and that, my success is rooted in the success of others. And that's how I've guided myself personally, professionally, right? It's quick little snippet about my family life, and clearly has nothing to do with the job per se, but it gives insight into my MO, into how I operate as a person. And so, an example, if you're applying for a gaming a gaming job and you love to game, or you love a certain topic within that within the field that you're applying to, feel free to add what you something personal that's related to the profession or the job that you're applying to.
I love that. Melanie, anything to add to the tell me about yourself discussion?
Yeah. One thing is, find ways to kind of weave into your story about some of your strengths that relate to the job that you're being interviewed for without being so blatant, like, I'm a strong organizer. I have, really great technical skills. Kind of like Nehemiah was saying, like, I really love technology. I've had the, anytime I can learn something new or learn a new database, I really geek out on that, that, and keep it, where you're telling your story, you're telling about your personality and who you are, but you're also showcasing aspects of the job description and things that about you that are strong, so that starts to lay that groundwork for those types. And most likely when you'll start getting questions about those, and you're going to be more comfortable to talk about them.
Totally. These are great. Thank you guys. There's one question in here that I'm going to take, which is about the project management certifications that we have. So I just want everybody to kind of understand how the PMP and the CAPM and all these things are organized. So project management is a great field. It's a growing field. And we offer a certificate in project management, but there are some other entities that also offer certifications. And those entities actually, we work really well with those, so that if you take our certificate, you can also be prepared to pass some of these other exam certifications that are out there in the world. And so one of those certifications is called the CAPM exam. And that exam is a project management exam that you get that certification afterwards. And our certificate is aligned to that exam. So you take ours, you're prepared for that exam. And that is another signal to an employer that you are a project management professional. It is, I would say that it's valuable in the field, but I wouldn't say that every job requires this in any way. It's more of like something kind of to add to your resume, to show that you kind of have these skills in a more formal way. One step up from the CAPM exam is another exam called the PMP. And this is a higher level exam, and it actually requires that you do some work as a project manager before you take the exam. So if you're interested in the PMP, it's a great idea to take our certificate, try to work a little bit, maybe get an internship or do some side work as a project manager, and then go and sit for this PMP exam. And I would say that the PMP it's a little bit higher level, like I said, than the CAPM. And so more jobs may notice it, but these are all signals to add to your resume over time, but none of them are required to get a job as a project manager. So I hope that answers questions about the PMP and the PMI, because there's tons of questions in that area. So Diana has a question here in the chat, but she said she had to log off. So we're going to take her questions offline because she had to log off to restart her computer. But there is a question here from Spencer about Tableau. So Angie, I'm hoping you can dive into this for a minute. So he's talking about, having a little bit of a hard time connecting the dots and completing and creating compelling visualizations for business problems. And so are there any books or websites to get some of that real world application of Tableau to bring kind of into the role, into his next position?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And unfortunately, what makes that a little bit hard is that like getting the real data out there into the public is sometimes an issue, right? So that's what makes it like accessing it a little bit, it's like private essentially. But I would say one of the first places that is probably really great to look if you want to see great examples of Tableau projects created by like real people, it's probably Tableau Public itself. There are lots of people from varying degrees of expertise, from people just having started to like Tableau experts. I think they call them Tableau wizards. I'm not sure the exact terminology. And them right there you can see there's like little descriptions sometimes where you can see like the backstory behind that, like why they created that project and all that. So that would be one of the first places that I'd look. In terms of books, I would have to get back to you on that because none of them are kind of jumping to mind right now. But I would say the best way to get like more exposure or like kind of feel like you're connecting the dots is probably going to be like continuing doing those end-to-end type of projects, but using Tableau, or continuing some sort of case study with Tableau. And if you're interested in exploring that, I believe it was Spencer who posted that, then Spencer, we can explore that together and kind of look for data sets online where we can do that and how to apply that in Tableau.
Thanks, Angie. All right, so moving on, Tamara has a couple of questions here. One is about talking about your weaknesses. And so I'm curious from our coaches, is there a good way to answer the question, you know, what are my weaknesses, in a way that doesn't like overexpose yourself, but doesn't also sound kind of spammy, like, oh, my strengths are my weaknesses kind of thing. So I'm curious if anybody's got thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. One of the ways that I like to approach this philosophically, and one is the idea that there's no such thing as a perfect workplace, and there's no such thing as a perfect employee, right? Nor employer. And so, going in with that, part of the idea of the question is, do you have a level of self-awareness, that if somebody brings something to you to fix or to improve, can you hear that, right? And ultimately, the question is, previously, have you been in certain circumstances where you've known there's something to be improved? And so the way you want to frame this is, as not necessarily weakness per se. And if you want to, you can, but I like to use them as an area of improvement professionally. And so, an example, it could be, hey, yes, previously on my evaluations, I was told this, this, and this, and I'm looking to improve it by doing this, this, and that. And so not just saying, what the weakness, deficiency, whatever it may be, but your demonstrated effort in ways to show that you've been working to improve that.
I like that. Anything you guys want to add to that?
I would just, a lot of what Maya said, I completely back that as well. And just really, the question really is to be able to see how you can look within yourself, because there's nothing worse than having interviewed a ton of candidates and done a lot of interviews for clients when somebody says, well, I don't have any. And we all know that we do all have. So don't feel the pressure of that question of like, you have to it could be something as simple as like, whether you're not you've recognized in yourself that you don't have the strongest organizational skills, but because of that, something that you recognize, then you are constantly working on it. Maybe you've created some systems for yourself that help you stay organized, and showing how you address that in your day-to-day life is really the key to, the answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
To make sure the answer you're preparing for your weakness is not listed as a top requirement for the job. It happens sometimes, right? Like, you're being honest, you're talking about your self-development and how you're focusing. Just make sure it's not a deal breaker. My weakness is really Tableau. Well, don't say that for a data analytics position, right?
So
find something else that you're growing on.
So Rachel, you're cutting out a little bit, but what we did get was that we don't want to be sharing, we don't want our weaknesses to be really big prerequisites for the jobs, because that's sort of a red flag that will kind of perk up the ears of the interviewer. And I totally agree. And I think that's something that shows that you've done your homework, right? When you're really reading that job description to know what to be careful of. All right. So Tamara also has another question about when you get these kinds of behavioral interview questions, which are like, tell me about a time when so-and-so happened. I generally, these are hard questions to answer. And my approach is always to come up with stories from your career, from all different sorts of jobs you've held. But Tamara is asking kind of a question about this, because what if you don't have a lot of good stories, or it's hard for you to think of those good stories? So I want to know if there's any strategies coaches have for coming up with these stories to help answer behavioral interview questions.
I'll start off, because one of the things I coach a lot of people that will interview for some major companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, and even within Amazon, they have a specific method that they want you to answer their questions, and it's called the STAR method. And so it's your situation, the task, the action you did, and then the result of it. And so one of the key things that they like for people to do is pull stories from all aspects of their career, not just their careers, but you can pull from your aspects of maybe having gone to school. Maybe there's I just had a client that she's first generation to graduate college here in the United States. And so it was relating to I forget what it was in direct relation to, but it was a story of like really what inspired her or something along those lines. And that was her parents and the sacrifice that they made and what that instilled in her. And so it was really showing like what her values are and things of that nature. So start to just look at all of the situations. Maybe you were tasked in a college course or something of that nature, or your very first job even. So even if you don't necessarily have say that project manager story or something like that, you can pull stories from even our personal lives. You don't have to give too, you don't have to be oversharing or anything, but you can pull from situations that have maybe really helped push you ahead and things that you've achieved.
Yeah, and I can add on to that as well. So I'm gonna do that thing that Rachel was talking about. So with a lot of behavioral questions, oftentimes employers they're trying to predict future human behavior. And one thing human beings are terrible at is predicting future human behavior. So they want to get information from your previous behaviors to predict who will you be during this time that you're employed. And so for a lot of my clients, a lot of my students, I like to focus on, even though there are methods of stating the question, stating the answer, always leave with your takeaway, which is to say, what did I learn or gain from the experience that I can bring to this new experience? Because ultimately, to be real, what you did is almost irrelevant. What you're bringing is what's actually irrelevant. And so, an example, as a career coach, I'll give a quick story of like the first time I messed up a negotiation, right? We had there was a time where I was helping somebody negotiate. This was years ago, and I didn't do the proper research. And it turns out that the employer didn't accept the offer, and we dropped the offer. Lesson I learned from that was to make sure that when we're doing negotiation is to make sure that my client's prepared with the proper information to negotiate, and they feel confident in what they're going to ask. Because if they don't feel properly confident, then then there might be some miscommunication between them and the employer. And so that's a quick example, right? But ultimately, what you want to show is not just what you did or what happened. What did you learn? What lesson, what skill, what experience did you learn that you are now ready to bring to this current experience? And that's the gap that you want to make sure you're addressing in those behavioral questions. Not just what you did, not just what happened, but ultimately, what are you going to be bringing from those experiences?
And this might be like data specific, but something I always recommend, especially when they ask you like a combination of behavioral and like data. So tell me about a time where you had to deal with a challenging project or something like that, is like, if you don't have a lot of projects to work with, just get super, super familiar with like the few projects you have, or like one or two projects, and then make that question work around it. So that way, like whatever question they have, like you can essentially answer everything because you're so familiar with that project. And it doesn't require you to have like 10 years of experience with different projects, right? So I guess it can be applicable to any other role that requires like some sort of project experience, but definitely for those applying for like analyst roles and all that, when they want you to talk about a specific project where you had to work with like a difficult data set. Doesn't have to be the most difficult data set in your entire life, but if you're super familiar with that project and that's the one you're more comfortable speaking to, I'd say speak to that one.
Thank you, guys. That's great. So I'm going to skip around a little bit on some of these questions. And there's a question from Jules about managing stress during salary negotiations. And so we had a webinar last week where we talked about negotiation, but we didn't really talk about stress and how we kind of like really internalize these things. It's a very stressful experience. So what do you all think about that?
Like I would say the number one thing about stress is, to really understand what you're stressed about, right? So is the stress that in this part of a coach where we work with, let's really talk about this. Is the stress that if you negotiate they'll pull the offer? Is the stress that you're going to not ask for all you want and leave money on the table, right? So I would say during the negotiation process, if and when you do feel stressed out, it might be helpful to write out, hey, here are the 1 to 3 things I'm stressed about, and that way you can create strategy around those things. As a coach, what I've learned is it's important to understand what emotions you're feeling and be honest about them, and that way you can actually create strategy to actually address them properly.
Which I was just going to say, you have to really, you can tell Nehemiah and I coach a lot, because I was going to say, you have to really understand where stress is caused by fear. So you have a fear of something is causing you to, stress out at that you're afraid of something's going to happen. And so, understanding, yeah, it is very stressful, but also just remember that, also you can even like look to say to yourself, okay, how many times do people think about like how many times are people probably negotiating a salary right this very minute? It's probably, I mean, who knows what the exact number is, but if that at least like say 10 people have all, negotiated a salary, and out of those 10, only, I've actually in 20 years, I'll be honest, have never had an offer rescinded because somebody asked or tried to negotiate. And also ask yourself, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, are you afraid of what the answer is going to be? So just really getting in tune with that, and just take, and I always say, just anytime you're stressed out, just take a deep breath, whether that's interviewing, asking the negotiation questions, just take a deep breath, have yourself, try to relax yourself, and just, be confident in how you phrase that question to the person. And, and then from there, just stop talking and let it go.
Related to the taking a breath, each time I go to talk, my internet becomes unstable. I hope this comes through. Get it in writing. Get any offer in an email. I would always recommend when they call you and say, hey, congratulations. We'd like to welcome you to the team. Here's your offer. It can feel really easy to be excited or disappointed, depending on your offer, right? But you want to be sincere. Thank you so much. I'd love to see that in an email so I can get some time to think through. This is a really big decision for me and my family, or I'd like to consider and see all of the details before making a decision, because that allows you time to take the breath and assess how you want to progress forward with any offer. Because it's really hard to go back and forth on the phone with information that is new to you and very familiar to the recruiter or the hiring manager and who's ever calling you. So slow it down, get it in email, and take time to think through, talk with other people, and then make your strategy.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I want to move on to this question that I'm starting to pick questions from the chat that are kind of really different from what we've already talked about tonight. But one of these questions is about struggling to get an interview. So other than filling out applications, what are the things that you can do to increase your odds of getting that interview?
Well, I'm going to go with my go-to, and students that have worked with me they probably know the answer to this would be, I'm going to tell you to go to LinkedIn, and I'm going to tell you to really, I think there was a statistic or something, I don't remember the exact number, but it's something like 70% of the people are, getting interviews based through networking. And I know you may be starting off and you're like, well, my network's like 10 people or things like that, but there's ways to go about finding, connecting with recruiters, commenting on posts, and engaging with hiring managers with companies. And, even asking people at, your wish list of companies that you want to work with, how did you land that job, and getting information and really building yourself a personal brand on LinkedIn and getting connected with the right people. And so that's the thing that, is really a door opener that's going to really help you build those relationships, help you get connected, whether it's to recruiters, to hiring managers. There's a lot of great resources on LinkedIn that can help you do that. So, if you're not finding the interview, if you're not just applying for the job, sometimes nowadays is not enough because of the number of resumes recruiters are getting. So you've got to figure out ways to make yourself stand apart. And that's, by getting connected directly with the hiring managers, recruiters, individuals in those companies.
And to love that advice. I think LinkedIn's super important, but then also if we want to backtrack a little bit, I think just making sure that your resume is just super aligned to the role that you're applying to. So you can have multiple versions of your resume. The one size fits all won't necessarily fit for this. So making sure that I think, Melanie, you mentioned the brand is getting represented, your brand is getting represented to your resume, that you're really getting marketed as whatever that new role that you're applying to is. Most companies you're applying to now, most roles you're applying to now have that applicant tracking system, that little robot that reads your resume. So making sure that it's pretty friendly to that robot. And so you're going to have to tweak some wording, tweak the keywords, the phrasing, all of that, so that it can actually pass through the tons and tons of resumes. So if you feel like you haven't revamped it and it's just getting no, then maybe let's take a step back and it's okay, is this actually geared towards the roles that I'm applying to? And career services, we can help you with that.
Is, doing direct outreach to the either hiring manager, supervisor, or the person that's in charge of, or the recruiter for that role. So sometimes, an example, if the website is available, searching website and seeing who the chair of the department is, or who the direct supervisor is for the role. And even though you might not find the right person, part of it is, probably doing the proper messaging, hey, I apply. This is after you apply to the role. Let me talk slower. After you apply to the role, doing outreach and finding somebody to email from the organization, let them know what the role is, and ask them to direct you to the proper hiring manager. Now, this isn't something that's 100%, but I've seen that it can help in terms of actually getting to the interviews, because ultimately it's a second chance for the person to look over your resume, because you're going to attach your resume too in those emails. And so, those are things I've seen increase interviews, is really being able to find the recruiter, the hiring coordinator, or the supervisor for the role, and, expressing further outreach, for having interest in the role. And in those emails, you can work with your career coach as well if you need help, thinking how to formulate that kind of communication.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to take one or two last questions. And I just saw that Zora from our career services team posted our link to our YouTube page, which has all of our past webinars. And this has a lot of answers to the questions that I'm seeing here. So I think that the one of the questions here that we haven't necessarily addressed is how to open up a conversation about a salary increase with a manager, or during an evaluation, or during kind of a crucial time, right, with your current employer. And I'm wondering if there are tips for kind of opening up this conversation, which can potentially be uncomfortable.
I'd say, much like our other responses to dealing with challenge, step one is coming prepared to that conversation. So starting with self-awareness of, what do I bring to the table at this company? What is my value add? What is my pitch for how I make an impact at this company? And listing out specific examples of how you're doing your job well and how you go above and beyond. because that's going to help you make the case of, I'm worth it in this business transaction that we're engaging in. And it allows you and your supervisor, your manager, whoever's making this decision, have reasons to be able to advocate for that increase. So I would recommend first starting with your strengths, your value add.
Adding to that, Rachel, a really great example of something I saw someone do is essentially like adding the evidence to why we should get that increase, right? But a lot of the times we forget, by the time we get to our salary negotiation or whatever it may be, like we forget a lot of the little things we've done, or like even the bigger things, we don't acknowledge them in as much detail as we should. So this one particular person had been noting down like the projects that she had been working on from like when she started them, and then like the impact she had. Like she had a running Google Doc of them. And so when it came time for the salary negotiation, she had this huge Google Doc listed of all the work she had done and all of that impact it had. So it really was like extra great to be able to present. And I think both her and her manager were like, whoa, okay, so maybe you do deserve this salary increase. So if you find yourself like having a hard time remembering all of the work you've done, or it's just always so busy and you're doing a million projects, I feel like that would be a really great use as you're like working on the various projects throughout your time at your role.
Thank you, guys. Rachel,
can I add one more thing?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So once you do make the case, right, what happens? They could either say yes or no. And going into the conversation, I want you, I forget who said it before, with salary negotiation, but feeling confident for the ask that you're making. Know that it is expensive for a company to replace an employee. It is cheaper for them to retain you and hopefully increase your salary, right? In the meantime. So I hope that gives you confidence to know that it is a business value to keep you at the company. So they're going to be looking for ways to retain you, especially now where so many people are making moves and going places. So I hope that that brings confidence to any conversation you have. And if there's a no, right? You make that pitch for yourself, you share all these great things you've done, and they say, it's not in the budget right now, or you're not in that band, that salary band. Look to the future and close with, what will it take for me to get to this level, to show that I'm still in this, whether you are or not, right? But look for future actions you can take to know, all right, I'm working towards it and I do want to get to that salary level. So make them provide some, or look to have them provide some sort of actionable items for you to take based on that conversation if it is a no.
Awesome. So as we wrap, I want to say kind of two things. One is that this is the last Designing Your Career series for this particular kind of spring winter series, but we are constantly launching new workshop series. So please stay tuned for the next set of workshops, which we will likely be launching sometime early, like late spring, early summer. I also wanted to just say that the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, the questions that we're discussing today, like this is very normal. Like what you guys are experiencing is a job search and changing your career or exploring new careers. And this is one of the most emotional aspects and parts of having a career at all, right? Is just figuring out what you want to do, trying to get noticed by recruiters and employers. Like this is incredibly emotional and very difficult. And so just want to acknowledge that nobody, like all these questions are very normal. And that doesn't mean that they become easier overnight, but I want you to know that you're not alone and that we have faced these questions and these concerns in our own career. And you are not alone. There are we are seeing tens of questions here about similar concerns and anxieties and fears, because this is a scary thing. So I just wanted to normalize and acknowledge that it is very difficult to find a job, even though there are lots of jobs out there and you hear about the market being so good, it is still a very hard thing to do. So I commend all of you for showing up on a Wednesday evening to get your questions answered and to hear from other people that are going through the same thing. So I think that means that you prioritize your career and you're working in that direction, and just very happy to see all of you tonight. And I look forward to seeing you at a future webinar, in our programs, with our career coaches. But we're so happy to be able to help you tonight. And a final thank you to our career coaches, Melanie, Nehemiah, Rachel, Angie. Thank you for being here tonight. East Coast, West Coast, all different times. We appreciate you putting your students first, and being here to support us all. So thank you so much.